Hey everybody, it's Jamie, and welcome to Dev Diary number 12, where today we're going to be talking about training, player and team training. So, once again, as usual, thanks so much for joining us here for this Dev Diary series, because here at Geeked-Out Basketball, we're building the world's best deep tactical basketball simulation game. It's Football Manager for basketball, because hardcore basketball sim gamers like all of you need your game too. And without further ado, let's jump into today's topic. Now, I know I say this probably every time that the topic that I'm covering is one of my favorite topics, but this is legit. This is one I've been really excited to share with you guys because I think the training and the way you can approach training is probably one of the best pieces of evidence to show you all just how much depth is in this game and how much control you can take as a coach when you're playing this. So I've shown you a lot of videos so far where you've seen the gameplay, and the gameplay is getting there, and the gameplay experience is going to be, I think it's going to be a step above a lot of other just pure deep tactical sim games. The amount of control and adjustments you can make in real time, I think, is a pretty significant delta over other games that exist in this genre. But I think this training is going to be a super exciting feature for all of you. So one thing to note, as a reminder, we have 3 game modes. We have single game, tournament, and franchise. And you only run training in tournament mode or franchise mode. And I will get into this a little bit, but the training is going to have different types of impact in those 2 modes. In tournament, it's really going to be a short-term approach. What do you need to dial up for this next game so you can win? Because a tournament at most right now is 3 games long. It's 8 teams playing a single elimination tournament. We're going to have more teams in the future and more dynamic tournaments you can play. But it's the franchise mode where you're going to need to approach training from both the short term, how do I need to prepare for my upcoming game? But I'll get into this. There's going to be a long-term approach too. There's going to be certain decisions you make from a training and coaching standpoint that things are going to compound both positively and negatively with your team. And you're going to have to make some decisions on how you want to instill your coaching identity onto your team. It's a deep and it's a layered topic in Geeked Out Basketball. Training is. Today's meant to be an introduction. So I'm going to be doing a lot of videos over the next few months regarding training, especially when we launch the alpha near late January, early February. But let's just introduce you all to what training is. And so to start that, first thing to note is, training is going to impact your player attributes, which we all have here, which that's pretty straightforward. There are also a series of team attributes that training is going to impact. And I'll get into all of these and I'll do a tutorial, but think of these like the same way your players have attributes like scoring, shooting, rebounding, inside defense, basketball IQ, endurance. Your team overall has attributes as well. And think of these as sort of like the overall essence of the team, the attitude of the team. You know how like sports is just as much mental and emotional as it is physical and ability. And so a lot of times teams will get into a mindset where they're just really good shooters or they're really focused on rebounding. And that's kind of that's a team attribute that's going to elevate or maybe they're really good defensively and that's just where their mindset is. Or they're really good at fast breaks. You're going to be managing that type of stuff as a coach as well. So not only your player attributes, but all of your team attributes. And so like, for example, shooting, I think I'm going to rename this. This is just the likelihood that they're going to score baskets. So it's not just outside shooting. It also pertains to inside shots, but it's just the likelihood that the shot is going to go in the hoop, if I'm saying that pretty simply from an overall macro perspective. Rebounding is just your team's sort of mindset around rebounding. And the way to look at these pills, these horizontal status pills, is there's a line right down the middle, a yellow line. If you can see that, it's kind of faint. Anything going off to the right means that that's a positive attribute for your team, as illustrated by the green fill. And anything going off to the left that's a negative attribute for your team, as illustrated by the red fill. And and the horizontal pills fill in each direction proportionally. So like, for example, in this case, shooting, the team's pretty maxed out right now with that attribute. Also, another thing to note too, when you initiate a new tournament, we randomize your team attributes with values as if they have been playing together for a while. So you're like getting that team at a moment in time. Whereas when you start a new franchise, most of these start pretty close to zero, because the thought is that you're starting with more of a blank slate and you're going to start to build that team's identity from the ground up in your vision as a coach. And then offense and defense. So don't get offense confused with shooting. Shooting is, again, just the likelihood that your team's scoring buckets. They're scoring baskets. Offense and defense is overall how effectively your team's going to be executing offensive plays, defensive plays, which is different than shooting or defending shots, right? It's how well are they running the plays? How well are they setting screens? How well are they moving together in unison to execute and get players open? How well are players going to read maybe a soft spot in a zone defense they can go to? You'll get a feel for all this. That same applies to fast breaks and press trap. It's just how well is your team executing fast breaks or presses and traps overall. And then aggression and discipline. This is just really the overall, just like, what's the aggressive mindset of your team? This is different than the gameplay sliders where you can call and demand your team be aggressive or passive or normal aggression on certain turns. This is more their overall mindset. So obviously, if you want to play an aggressive style of basketball, you're going to want to find ways to coach your players into an aggressive mindset, which that's going to be one of the things you can uncover. And then discipline as well too. And these can work together. You can have them both built all the way up. Like, to me, if you have a highly aggressive team who's also highly disciplined, that's amazing. And then you layer in strong athletes, who can execute on aggressive plays, then you got a lot of fun stuff going. Momentum. So both teams have a macro momentum attribute, and then players each have their own momentum attribute. These are actually meant to be, these are very volatile. So they're going to go up and down based on the results of games, based on the results of turns, so they're going to be highly, highly volatile. Whereas most of these other ones that I walked you through, they're going to adjust, toggle up and down more gradually based on your longer term approach to coaching. And so think of these are going to have to compound over time, right? Shooting, rebounding, offense, fast breaks, press traps. They're going to compound positively and negatively if you neglect them in training. Whereas momentum is going to be more about you're just getting your team fired up for this game, and they're in it. But you can have a maxed out momentum before one game, and it can be zero or maybe even in the red for the next game. It's a highly, highly volatile attribute. Team chemistry. Right now, this scale's up to 25. I'm playing with the right scale for this. We'll talk more about chemistry, but as you can imagine, just like any sport, right? You want to have good chemistry amongst your team. And then this is sort of like the inverse fast break defense and press trap breaks. These are inverse measures to your team's ability to execute fast breaks and press traps. They're a little more situational, so we don't use horizontal progress pills. These are more just statuses. I want to find better icons. Right now, you either have 3, 1, or 2 red minus signs or 3, 1, or 2 green plus signs to indicate where your team's overall ability to do each of these is. I'm going to play with better ways to illustrate that. So those are team attributes. And then the other thing I want to get into too is playbooks, because one of the things that gives Geeked Out Basketball so much depth is this is a basketball sim where you're doing more than just managing players and player attributes. Like I said up here, you're managing your team and your team attributes. You're also managing plays and plays in your playbook. Plays and playbook and managing those is just as important in this game as managing your players and your roster. And so I'll get into this, but right now, each play, offense and defense, has 3 attributes, if you want to call it. This is what type of command your team has of each play. So How much have you run this in practice? Have you installed it quite a bit? Have they been running it quite a bit? The more, this is going to be a heavy compounder. So the more your team runs core plays, they're going to develop a really strong command. And then what you'll see, if you're, especially you're in franchise mode, as you get later in the season, if you build up a heavy degree of command in a play, you don't really need to run it in practice as much. You can focus more on installing new plays into your playbook, and maybe even new ones that are going to fly under the radar from a scouting perspective to your opponent. There's going to be a whole play management component to this sim where you're going to, A, just be trying to not let your playbooks get stale, but balance that with relying on the plays that are working for you. But then B, constantly injecting new plays or creative approaches, because if you just keep running the same playbook turn after turn in a game, or even game after game throughout a season, your opponents are going to catch on to that, and your overall plays, both offensive and defensive, are going to be less effective if you aren't mixing it up. A momentum. So each play is going to have its own momentum. So the way command and your team's command of a play is going to compound more slowly up and down. Momentum is going to be a highly volatile attribute. So it might be maxed out for one game and zeroed out for another, depending on how much you practice it, how much success your team is having with it, and whatnot. And then cloaking, this is really just, I'll get more into cloaking. Cloaking is going to be a pretty exciting thing for y'all to think through, but this is just how well are you disguising entry into each play so that defenses aren't reading that you're entering that play right away and then kind of getting ahead of your adjustments. It's going to improve. And there's going to be ways you can manage cloaking. The two best ways are, number one, if you enter an offense from a number of different sets, so from like a 4-1 setup, from a 3-2 setup, from a 5-0 setup, if you can, that's going to do a great job of giving you a higher cloaking score. Now, one thing to keep in mind, it's going to, when you're entering from a bunch of different entry sets, it's going to slow down the command of your team getting command of that play, because they're going to have to wrap their head around entering from all these different sets, right? So there's a trade-off for that. Another degree that's going to impact cloaking is your point guard. Or if you're entering plays with a different, like a small forward or something, if they have a high IQ attribute, they're going to be better at doing things to kind of keep the defense off balance as you're entering that play, and that's going to pump up the cloaking score a little bit. So it's going to be less telegraphed during gameplay, and it's also going to show less of a pattern during film study when your opponent is studying your game tape. So again, each offensive play has all these attributes, and then each defensive play has it as well too. So all your zone sets, and then when we're gonna right now we just have one base man set. We're also gonna put in different variants of man defense in here as well. So keep in mind, because this is all stuff you're gonna have to be mindful of when you're managing your training. But let's jump into training, because again, those are the big three buckets: your player attributes, your team attributes, and your play call, your playbook play call attributes. So we'll go to training. So what you'll do is you have to run training one time, and you only run it one time before every game in tournament mode or franchise mode. And this main button is going to have it queued. So if you haven't run your training before your next game, this button up here is going to be queued for run training. If you have run your training, then your button's going to be queued to play the next game. So we'll come here to the training screen. And one feature I don't have in here right now that I'm going to put in here is I want to put a button in here that you can go back and look at what are my current player attributes, team attributes, and playbook attributes. So you can, put some thought into your strategic decisions. But the way training works is you have, I think it's 20 different sliders here, and I'll go through each of these, and you have 24 training points. So you need to assign your 24 training points across these 20 categories. So player drills are going to be the way that you improve your player attributes. These are drills just focused on improving their scoring, their shooting, their inside defense, outside defense. They're technical drills like passing, ball handling, rebounding, and then how much time do you want them to be in the weight room, and what sort of exercises do you want them focused on strength training or agility. And you also have team drills. So you're going to have your offense install, your defense install. I'm going to get into how that works here in a second. Just know you're going to have time. It's going to be more just sort of like the team and you teaching them the offensive plays, and then them kind of with no defense against them, or like a just like a very, not in a non-competitive situation, just learning the plays. You're also going to have your fast break offense install and your press trap defense install. You can also devote some time to defending fast breaks or executing and breaking presses and traps. So like, for example, if your scouting report tells you that your opponent runs a lot of fast breaks, then you're probably going to want to spend some time prepping a little fast break defense. If your scouting report tells you they don't run any fast breaks at all or very minimal, you just might want to zero that one out so you can focus your resources elsewhere. And now scrimmages are where you're going to actually then run your playbook or run your plays, your target plays, in a competitive situation. And so the way to think about it is offense install is going to improve your offense efficiency and the value of the command scores of the plays that you are practicing, which you use these radio buttons down here, and I'll get into how these work to determine which plays you're focusing on. Same for defense. And then what scrimmage does is scrimmage is also going to plus up your offensive defensive efficiency a little bit more, not quite as much. It is going to plus up the play command scores that you have queued up for that practice because they're running them in a real live competitive situation. But you're going to see some other attributes, team attributes being dialed up. This is where your team kind of like toggles up or down their scoring attribute, their rebounding attribute. This is going to play with team chemistry a little bit because they're playing together in live situations. One thing to note though, and by the way, every slider has a range of 0 to 5. So you're going to have benefits when you do these, but you know, if you start dialing them up too much, usually 2 is sort of like a safe amount. 3 can be optimal, but that's where you start to maybe get a few negative effects of running some of these too much. And so like, for example, but you'll still get more, you know, and then 3, 4, and 5, you're still going to get increased positive effects, but then you're going to start coming in with some risk, right? And by the way, if you do 0 or 1, your risk is going to be almost a guaranteed, well, especially at 0, it's going to be a guaranteed regression in the items that are supported by that training category. And then 1, it's safe, you know, you run the risk of a little regression, maybe a little advancement. 2, again, sort of your sweet spot. That's why we've numbered these. You have to be thoughtful about what you're giving 2s or maybe even 3s or 4s. And then the way playbooks work are, number 1, standard. It just means it's going to take literally every single play in your playbook and give it equal weighting offensively and defensively across your install times and your scrimmage. You can also use current playbooks. And so what you can do is if you've set your playbooks ahead of time, so your game plans, let's say you set man at 100% defense for the next game for your upcoming game plan, and then you have 100% of it as a 2-3, let's say you do 100% zone, 0 man, and let's say you set your playbooks for zone defense to be 100% 2-3 zone because you're playing a team who does everything inside. And you click current playbooks, all of your defense install is going to be focused then on 100% 2-3 zone, and you're going to only run 2-3 zone during your scrimmages. And so your 2-3 zone play is going to get really plussed up on the command perspective and probably momentum to a degree, while your other zone and all your man defenses are going to regress from that perspective. You can also do custom. Let's say you're in franchise mode, you're later in the season, all of your core plays have really high command scores by your team, and you want to catch your next few opponents. Maybe it's right before the postseason tournament, and you want to introduce some new plays. Maybe you just build a custom and use all your offense and defense install time to introduce these new plays to your team and run them in scrimmage. There's a high amount of strategy that goes into that you can do that. And then there's also 4 sliders for general. How much time do you want to do your conditioning? So conditioning is going to increase your players' endurance attributes. Once you start getting into the 3s and higher, you run the risk of depleting their energy at the start of the next game. it's still like a 4 is going to most likely increase your player's endurance attributes more than a 3 will, and a 5 will more than a 5 will. So you're going to get that gain. You're going to get that benefit, but you're going to run the risk with scrimmages and conditioning. If you run those at 3 or more, you are going to have players at a reduced energy level to start the game. But then that's a one-game thing, right? Whereas endurance attribute gains are a little more long-term. So again, it's all about how you want to manage it. There's free throws, there's film study. And so what film study will do is it'll benefit your players' IQ scores. It's also going to take a look at the box score, and it's going to basically from your previous opponent or your upcoming opponent, their last game, it's going to look at the plays they ran the most, and it's going to essentially for you, there's going to be a combination of reducing the effectiveness and the cloaking score for the upcoming game if you do a lot of film study. So again, it's how much do you think your opponent is going to just run the same playbook as usual? If so, dial up film study and get your players really boned up on how this team is executing their offense and defense, and you could really undermine their playbook abilities. And then breaks. You're going to want to play with breaks. You can have 0 to 5 breaks. Your players are going to fatigue less with more breaks. There's going to be a sweet spot. If you go 0 breaks, most likely your overall effectiveness of everything is going to go down a little bit. You're going to run risk of more injury. As you dial up breaks, you have to use valuable training points for these, but it's going to increase the effectiveness of the drills that do get training points and whatnot. So that's that. And then the last thing I want to show you, so part of this too is you, especially in franchise mode, you're going to be challenged to build an identity here, your coaching identity, your team identity. And so you're going to be able to choose a focus every week for your training. And think of the focus as just like, what are you verbally focused on communicating your players while they're doing the drills, while they're scrimmaging and doing the practices? At the end of every practice, what sort of thing are you talking to them about? This is just sort of like mentally dialing in. It's, for the most part, it's going to amplify a lot of what you're doing from a drill perspective, and I'll get into that. There's also going to be some things, though, that kind of like over-index on dialing up your player's emotional state or your overall team chemistry. Unless you all really want it, I kind of want to keep the effects of focus, coaching focus, let you discover those on your own versus me spilling everything out. That being said, I'm more than happy to help it out. But basically there are 4 buckets. There's a authoritarian, so think of like you're a Bobby Knight. There's a systems coach. So if you're just really focused on running the systems. The best example I can give is actually a football. Think of Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh had his West Coast offense. And so he would ingrain that system into his players. And then the 49ers of the late 80s, the 80s essentially, were amazing at running his system. There's a player maximizer that's like a player coach. So this is going to be where if you just want to be the type of coach that you lean into your players and you're really about empowering them and just really making them as great as they can be, and then just relying on your players to outperform for you, I think that's the way to go. You can maybe argue Phil Jackson did that to a degree, although Phil Jackson was also a pretty good systems coach. And one thing you'll note too, well, let me get into culture builder, and then I want to talk about the crossover of these coaching styles. But then there's culture builder, and for culture builder, I think of someone like Pete Carroll in football. If you're going to be more like inspirational, like that's sort of like getting them to see the big vision, like paint the picture of what winning a championship could feel like, or confidence, just telling them how great they are. That's different than like actually coaching up their attributes. This is more of an emotional thing. And then like, for example, teamwork exists for both authoritarian and culture builder, but it's 2 very different approaches. Like an authoritarian approach is going to be like, you have to work as a team and you be holding them accountable, and there's going to be consequences to pay if they don't act properly as a team. Whereas the culture builder is going to take a more positive approach on that and be like, you guys are an amazing team and you have so much potential if you work well together. Both approaches can work. It's just kind of what you want to lean into. And then they're going to have different types of advantages and disadvantages. And then one thing too to note, there's going to be crossover. So the way I would think about it is in tournament mode, don't really worry about this. Just use it for short-term bursts. But during franchise mode, you're going to have to really be thoughtful about what do you want your coaching identity to be and what do you want to build as your team's identity. And typically what you're going to want to do is lean into one of these as your lead. And you can change. There's going to be a penalty if you change. But like, for example, if you're starting the season and you're leaning into authoritarian and you're like 0-4 and your team chemistry is down, you might have to sort of like recalibrate into like player maximizer or systems. And there's going to be a penalty to do that. But if something's not working for you, it's not working. That being said, there's going to be a great opportunity for a bit of cross-pollination across these styles. And the way to think about it is if you're starting to build equity as one type of coach, and let's say you've built really good equities as an authoritarian, you can start to then mix in systems coaching with that. And it's almost kind of like you got a major and a minor. And the way these really, so if they border each other down here, that means they pair very well together. So an authoritarian coach is going to be able to like mesh with systems most seamlessly. A systems coach can kind of go either way. It can go authoritarian and have a highly disciplined system-led program, or it can go player maximizer. And so you're really focusing on your systems and your players. Now, where your deficiencies are going to be if you kind of focus on the middle, these two on the ends are where you get more emotion and that type of stuff. Now, there are different types of emotion, right? Like this is a holy crap, I got to follow my coach, but I believe in him because he's laying down the law. And this one's like, we are amazing. I believe in my coach. So that'll be your risk there, but you'll have amazing, players, talented players running your systems amazingly. So that maybe that's the way you want to go. Or the player maximizer and the culture builder, you can see where that's right. Like you're building these players up both technically and emotionally. There's also, you can also cross-pollinate with a one skip level. So a culture builder could go into systems. It's going to like, this cross-pollination will happen faster. Culture builder plus player maximizer, but it can happen with culture builder plus systems coach, and the payoff, if you can get there, could be even better. Same with authoritarianism versus plus player maximizer. If you're laying down the law and you're coaching these players up, then that can be pretty special. The only two that don't really mix, but who knows, maybe some of you start playing this, you'll figure out a way to do it, but culture builder plus authoritarian doesn't really work. One thing you'll learn is that when you're playing the season, if you've built a strong, let's say it's like week 12, of a 14-week season, you've built a strong identity as an authoritarian, and maybe you've paired it with systems, you have just really disciplined program going. If you lean into a culture build, if you're just super inspirational for 1 week, that's going to actually counterintuitively, but that's going to be super effective for that 1 week. And if you've built enough equity over here, you won't really undermine your equity you have over here, and it's going to be even that much more special if you're inspirational or building up their confidence for a week, and then maybe that just like they're just lights out for that game, and then you're coming back right the next week to focusing on your authority and your systems. And so and actually, I don't have it queued up, but let me just do this quick. I wanted to show you all this. We are going to, here we go. This is just a mock one right now, but we're going to have a coaching grid that's going to show you during franchise mode, and we can do it during tournament mode too, but how you're doing. So basically, this is what sort of like overall equity have you built? So, is you compounding or is it stagnant? So like, for example, player maximizer is you have a lot of equity in this. Think of it as like you have a high effectiveness score as a player. Embedded and fragile is like your effectiveness score. So you've built a lot of equity as a systems coach here and kind of medium equity as a culture builder. And then your player maximizer and authoritarian are in the red. But where you've been focusing lately and where you're building momentum is compounding versus stagnant. So you're kind of like, you're maintaining systems. You can see this coach here is leaning into player maximizer while culture is down the middle, is kind of pulling back, and then authoritarian is left. So what this tells me is this is a coach who was building a systems plus culture program, but now seems to be shifting to systems plus player maximizer. So again, that's just going to be a measure we'll have for you as you play franchise mode in here. But let's actually run a training, and I'll show you how they work. And you can take all types of approaches to training. I'm going to pretend in this instance I really want to focus on offense. So let's dial up inside and outside offense, give them each a 2. I don't like to neglect defense, so I'll give them each a 1. And then I'm going to give my offense install a 3. And then I'm going to give my defense install a 1. I'm going to assume I don't want to fast break much, so I'm doing a lot of half-court offense. So I'm going to zero out my fast break, and I'm going against an opponent who doesn't fast break much. But I do want to do some pressing and trapping, and I'm going to have to prep for it a little bit. And then I don't want to ignore my technicals, so I'll give each of these a 1. And then let's just assume in this case I'm happy with my team strength. I'll leave it here, but agility, I want to maybe get that up at a 2. So now scrimmages, we'll run 2 worth of scrimmages, and then down here, I'm going to give them a break. I'll give them 1. We'll do 1 conditioning, and we'll do some film study. Again, and then let's actually do 2 rounds of breaks, and let's get some free throw drills in here as well. Remember, I zeroed out strength, so you'll see kind of that impact when we see the training results. And then I'm going to, as a systems coach, lean into offense. And one thing to note here is you're going to want your focus to complement your drills. So let's say I zeroed out rebounding up here and strength, and then I did a focus on rebounding. that focus would be amplifying nothing. Maybe a little bit of the rebounding in scrimmages, but that's about it. You're going to want to pair your focus with how you set your drills as much as possible. Now, there are some of these focuses that like inspire, build confidence. Most of them in Culture Builder are not going to be paired to like straight attributes. The other ones will though. And then another quick note too, like player maximizer, top 3 attributes. If you choose this one, that will simply just amplify the gains your players are getting in each of their top 3 attributes. So it's highly personalized to every player. It'll just make their strengths even stronger. Attributes 4 through 6 are each player's, it's highly customized. It's their 4 through 6 ranking attributes. But this is the way, if you want to like take them from good to great in every single player in their own way, that's how you do it. Or you can do custom. We'll build an interface where you can customize attributes for every player. Opportunity is a little bit different. Opportunity is just really about empowering your players. It's going to increase the effectiveness of your offenses when your players choose to not run the set play or like the standard motion. So it's basically encouraging your players to take control and to audible and do their own thing during plays and to seize opportunities if they see them. But we'll go into offense here. I'm going to have to do, I think, videos for you on all of these deep dives on the focuses. But what you'll do is you submit training. Again, until you allocate all 24 points and choose a focus, the submit training button is going to be dead. But once you meet that, we'll run training, give it a minute, and then it fills. And so what we're going to see here is you're going to start with your player attributes up top. These are all new attributes, and the way to see the changes is look here. You click the training changes, and it'll show you the plus and negative. Again, remember, we zeroed out strength. So almost all of our players lost some strength. A couple of them managed to maintain 0. And then we have various pluses and minuses across the board. And, we had an offensive focused practice, right? So, this guy, Pete Delfino, got a +5 shooting. I think we got a +5 scoring here for Freddie. So a few pluses and minuses across the board. Pluses for offense. And then team report. This kind of shows you how your team attributes toggled. And again, not a surprise, right? We got a +5. I'm gonna make sure you guys understand scaling for all of this, but this is a pretty positive movement right here. That's actually a +50 if these are scaling 100 to -100 each way. And you can kind of see our fast breaks decreased even more. We did improve our press traps. So we're almost getting to to a negative or a positive value for that. Our discipline and aggression decreased a little bit. They're both kind of hovering around the middle. And you see that for all this stuff, right? And then same for plays. You're going to see the deltas in your command for plays. Momentum and cloaking are only impacted during gameplay. So your training will only impact your team's command of each play. But because we ran so much on offense, we had a lot of gains. And it looks like we had had more effective motion practice than set plays, because all of our set plays did decrease a little bit. And then defensively, we did have install, so we did get some focus on our defense as well. And then we're working on a training notes section. These will be notes from your coaches that you'll kind of get little intangible things to kind of help you get clues into how training affected things as well. So, and then I hope this isn't super buggy, but let's jump back to the command center. Yeah, here we are. There is a weird little bug. I got to hit refresh right now for tournament data to load when I come back. But what you're going to see now is your players' attributes will all represent the new values based on the training. And again, for the training page, you can see the full 3-digit values, 2 or 3-digit. And then for ease, we just round it to the number. So like this guy has an OD in the 80s. So we just round it to 8 just to it's easier on the eye. But if you want to go back and look at your training report, you go to schedule, and now the training report is going to be linked here to your next game, and you can go back and look at it this way. So yeah, that's training. I hope you all are as excited about it as I am. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear your ideas or questions down in the comments section of the YouTube video. And we're going to be launching the alpha, I think, in late January. I'm pretty confident that's going to happen. And we're looking for 20 testers to help us out at the beginning. So if you want to be one of those people, please, there's a link in the description below, gobalpha.com. Log on there. You can give us your email address, register your email address, and we'll send a note out. And you'll be first in line to get an opportunity to be one of our first 20 testers. Okay. As always, if you've watched the video this far, I would really appreciate a like and maybe a subscription to the channel. And tell all your other friends who love games like this, to play games like this, about us as well. And I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me geek out about training in Geeked-Out Basketball. Okay, I hope everyone has a great day. Bye.